Hello, I'm testing.
At BMW, we know leaving the road wasn't easy, but anticipating our return taught us to appreciate every drive. At BMW, we know leaving the road.
I'm muted. Laura, you on?
Mute yourself if you're going to talk to me that way. Erica, you want to give everybody a few more minutes and then we'll start?
Yep, that sounds good.
Holler when you're ready.
You want to get started? Or do you want to wait?
We got to do something. I can't just stand here. I took all my notes. I got to do something else if we're not going to do this. So,
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and mute everyone, but then feel free to stick your questions in the chat box. Depending on how in-depth we get into some of this stuff, we should have some time at the end. So thank you for being here. And again, just put your questions in the chat box at the bottom of the screen and we'll get started. So Laura,
let's do this.
personal properties are always a hot topic.
Certainly are.
What are some of the reasons that we have the guidelines that we do?
Yeah, the main reason is our E&O insurance, in order to get it at a decent rate, right? And we're always looking to protect we're a pass-through company and we're always looking to protect what the agents pay, right? So it all comes back to you guys and your bottom line. And in order to do that, we have to have certain guidelines that our E&O insurance carrier requires, especially on personal properties. None of you would do this, but believe it or not, there are some real estate agents out there that don't act ethically, especially when selling their own properties, which then puts the brokerage at risk, and the E&O companies, the insurance companies, have to cover higher costs. So That's why we put those in place. They're just guidelines based on what we're required to do. Do you want me to go into them?
That's up to you. What would you say some of the most common like misconceptions are when it comes to personal properties?
Yeah, the one most people don't like is that if you're selling your own personal property and the buyer doesn't want to have a home inspection, you have to have a home inspection. You have to pay for a home inspection. If the buyer does not want to pay for a home warranty, you have to pay for a home warranty. Those are the two biggies. I mean, everything else is just common sense, right? It's disclosing that we're real estate professionals on the appropriate forms, which is your agency disclosure. It's on the purchase agreement. And the one addition, and this is because of the E&O insurance, is it has to be on the property disclosure form too. That's different, right? That's just a little different than we are required by the division. And yet some agents really don't want to handle that extra cost that could be involved in a home warranty and a home inspection. And yet you got to do it.
So what do you need to do as far as signage is concerned? And let's assume the property is not titled in your name. Maybe it's in an LLC or it's your spouse or what have you.
Well, if you have even 1% ownership in a property, right? That means you are married to, even if you've waived your rights and everything else, the state says you still have ownership and you can make decisions. And if you're an executor on a will, that's one too. Because if you're benefiting from it, right? If you're an executor, you're not benefiting from it, it's one thing. And if you are benefiting from it, it's another. And what else did you ask me? Just totally lost my train of thought there.
Signage, and if it's in the name of a spouse.
Yeah. So if it's in the name of a spouse, it's still you. So the signage, the rules are exactly the same. You're going to have to put, you're going to have to get a writer for your sign. It says agent owned. If you put it on your Facebook, it's going to have to say agent owned. If you put it in the MLS, you're going to have to check the box that says agent owned. If you put any kind of advertising, a flyer or anything else together, it's got to have that disclaimer that it is agent owned. Did I miss any? I don't think I did.
I don't think so. Before we move on,
it says agent owned on your form. Just walk around.
Before we move on from that specific topic, does anyone have any questions that we may have missed? No. Okay. Next question. How would I know if my team member or assistant or maybe a transaction coordinator needs to be on the agency disclosure?
This is a really good one. This is going to take up the rest of our time together. Is that okay with everybody? Just kidding. Teams are all set up. Our teams are pretty set up differently. And so that makes this question a little harder to answer if you have a large team or you're part of a large team. So I'm going to give a real brief because I know Kristen's on here and, Renee, I know you guys are on larger teams, and I know that both those teams have provisions set up so that we can, that their stuff is kept. And it's really about the confidentiality of the information and who can see it and who has access to it. When we're talking about agency, for example, let's say we have a mega team and only part of the team represents buyers and only part of the team represents sellers. Well, if it's a buyer lead and the seller team and the rest of the buyer team would never get any confidential information on that particular client, then they don't need to be on that disclosure. Now, if that buyer's agent, if the team setup is that every transaction goes under a rainmaker's name, well, then that rainmaker has to be on there too, because that rainmaker will have agency relationship with that person because the consumer would think that they did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the question in my mind that we get a lot is I have a assistant that helps me put listings in. They're licensed, they're not licensed. What drives that need?
Well, if they're not licensed, there is no need because it's a disclosure of, real estate agency. So if it's a non-licensed, it's a non-issue. They don't have to be on the disclosure. That's an easy one. If they are licensed and they are going to have access or even communication, because remember the agency disclosure, the division put it in place so that the consumer knew who was representing whom, right? So this is a form that is just set out to protect the consumer. So if you are have a licensed transaction coordinator or a licensed admin of any sort, and they're going to have interactions with the consumer, they have to be on there. Because the consumer, even if it's on the page one way or the other, the consumer believes that if they're speaking to someone with a real estate license, that person could be representing them. Does that make sense? They don't know the rules of our game always, and sometimes we're not clear about it. So if we have a licensed assistant, they need to be on there if they're going to be interacting with the consumer.
Are there ever any circumstances where maybe someone shares an assistant, or let's even say it's a licensed admin for a team and there are two agents from that team representing, either side of the transaction?
Yeah, that's when it gets really fun, right? Might as well just, just sign everybody up. Just put everybody on there. You can't over disclose, in my mind. You can never over disclose. And the more people you put on there, if they have access to both sets of information, in the thought that I have is if you have a licensed admin of some sort, and the buyer is being represented by a buyer's agent on this team, and the seller is being represented by a seller's agent on this team, right? Then it has to be a dual agency. You can't have separate agency in that case. I would think it would have to be a dual agency, and everybody's going to have to be disclosed. If you're on a big team, that's a lot of people sometimes.
Okay.
I don't know. Did I answer it, Erica?
I think so. Yeah. Is there anything I missed with that?
I don't think so. Did anybody else? Anybody? Got to unmute.
There we go. So the main places though to put it are on the agency and on the actual purchase agreement. But then when it comes down to like with the warranty and all the little side notes where it says who is the like buyer's agent, then I only put my own name. I don't have to put, like for my example, my team, Christine, is on the agency and on my purchase agreement, but the other places I don't have to, like if it's if we sign up for warranty and it says who's the agent, I could just put just my name on there.
Yeah, yes. As long as you're going to want to check with your rainmaker on that and make sure that what the team policy is, because that would then go to a team policy and they can make that decision. That's not an agency. Yeah.
Okay, that's where I got confused in the beginning. Was I just figured that her name and my name on everything, and then it was like no, only pieces and parts. So then I tried to figure out which pieces and parts. This is mainly for the MLS and for disclosure to the client.
So disclosing to the public is one thing, right? That's the agency. That was what Erica was asking there. But when you're talking about being on a team, and I don't want to get too into this, like this could really get us off in the weeds. When you're talking about a team and the MLS, well, when you're putting your name at the bottom of the MLS of who sold the house, a seller and a co-seller, lister and co-lister, that we see rainmakers doing it with just one name and not two, because if you put two, then you're separating the volume, right? And the point of a team is to take all of that volume and be able to market that we all have a part in this big picture. So that's why it's a little bit different. But agency is completely, we have to disclose that, and that's a non-negotiable. How a team is set up and run is really the rainmaker sets those rules, and then they give the expectation, and then the buyer's agent or the team members buy into that expectation. Did that answer it?
Thanks. All right. Laura, what are the options available to me if I'm in a contract and the buyer or the seller, or more likely the buyer seller's agent, become unresponsive?
That's a really great question. That's a really great question, and I probably have this situation multiple times a week, and it seems like it's ramping up with everybody being kind of staying at home and stuff. There seems to have been a lot more unresponsiveness and maybe some uncertainty in the market. I'm not really sure why recently. If the agent's being unresponsive, that's an easy one. I'll tackle that right away. If the agent's being unresponsive, then I would like to see you go straight to their manager or broker and say, hey, I've been trying to get a hold of Erica due to, XYZ Street, and I haven't been able to get a response. Do you know if she's okay? Right? I just think that's a really good way to go at it. And it's not Erica's not calling me, and sorry, Erica, I'm throwing you under the bus. Erica's not calling me and I need an answer. If we take that route, that is a route you can take, and yet it's a one-way street, right? It's a one-way street that ends in just really people beating their heads against each other. If we come in with a little care, a little curiosity, it puts the broker into calling Erica and saying, Erica, why are you not responding to this person? That's it. I mean, that's if it's an agent, I'd like to see you handle it that way. And that's after you've tried to reach Erica. If you've tried to reach Erica, like I call her, I hang up the phone, and then I call her broker and say, I called her and left a message. That doesn't really count. We need to give her a little time to return the call. So it just goes back into that curiosity and just using common sense on that. So if it's your buyer, and we've had a lot of this recently, is the buyer makes an offer, right? Has home inspections, and then just disappears. They've invested the money, they put down their earnest money, and then they just disappear. What do you do? They're not returning your call. They're not signing off on the ROC. They're not returning any calls. Well, at that point, all that you can do is go to the other agent and say, I just need to let you know that my buyer is unresponsive. And again, we're going to use common sense on the time frame. We're not going to just give him 24 hours. We're going to give like 48 hours. When we're right at that 3-day mark of an ROC, that's when we need to go ahead and let the other agent know, hey, they're just unresponsive. I've been trying, I've been reaching out. And also you can alert me or the broker and just let them know that, hey, heads up, 123 Street, this is the buyer, they're unresponsive, this is what I've done. And then we can just be all ready for that other broker or that other agent to call. What other scenario did I miss there? Oh, earnest money. Can I talk about earnest money really quick?
Yeah.
If the buyer does not turn in the earnest money, then that is something that the division really looks closely at. We, as the buyer agent, cannot force a buyer to turn in their earnest money. We also are not compelled to guarantee that that buyer is going to turn in that earnest money. We are, however, bound by the contract, and we're bound to go to the title company and say, hey, XYZ Title, did you receive a copy of Erica's check? Or did you get the wire, right? Either one. If they say yes, can you please send me an email saying that? That's all we need, right? We put that in our records. We don't need a copy of a check. We don't need a copy of a wire. We'd prefer no copies of wires or checks, actually, because it's got banking information. And yet they can send you a receipt saying they have received the money. That's all you have to do. If it's been received, you have nothing more to do. You are not compelled to tell the listing agent, hey, I just verified the earnest money's in. It's a courtesy. You can do it. We're not compelled to do it. Okay. I think it's an excellent business practice, and yet we're not compelled. We are, however, compelled that if the buyer tells us that they have wired the earnest money, we check with the title company and they say, nope, no earnest money. we call the buyer is unresponsive, then we do have to let the other side know that, I'm sorry, you know, the buyer's unresponsive. I just verified and the earnest money has not been deposited. What would your seller like to do? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Any questions? Okay. Hi, Troy.
Hi, Troy. Can we transfer title with outstanding issues, such as repairs?
Well, it's interesting because most title companies have a form they have everybody sign at title that nobody reads. I mean, has anybody ever been to a closing with their client? How fast can you guys get through how fast can your client get through a pack of papers this thick? 30 minutes or less. They just sign, 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 sign. So sometimes they don't understand what they're signing. If we have outstanding repair issues, right, that need to be, those all need to be addressed prior to transferring title, prior to them actually signing their papers. Because the one form that title has them sign is they're removing all contingencies from the contract, which include unresolved repairs. Unless, right, there's always an asterisk. Unless it's like a city violation or something like that that is happening in the future, final grading, you know, or a septic repair or something like that, then you need to do that in an extra addendum just to stipulate when that's going to happen, and it needs to be part of your closing. So the answer is yes and no. How about that? That's clarity. So yes, it can be done, and you have to do it with care. And
Probably before the CD is generated, I would guess.
well, unless there's a monetary thing, I mean, it could be after, couldn't it? I don't know. There's no lenders on here. I don't know that it would hang it up if there was nothing monetary in it. Like if it had already been, I'm trying to even think of what it could be. Well, let's go with the septic repair, right? If they couldn't do it in the winter or something like that, you know, weather permitting. If they're not holding money in escrow, then it wouldn't affect the CD, would it? Janet Jarvis.
True. Yeah, just to kind of take things into account beforehand.
Yeah, I think the more communication we have with all parties, the better. I think that's a really great way to think about it. You know, having a good relationship with the lender, having a good relationship, and I don't mean like, you know, we're golf buddies. I mean, you know, having an open dialogue with the lender and being able to say, hey, if we're going to do this, what is that going to do at a closing? How do you guys like to see this written in a contract, right? I think that's the best thing. And when in doubt, call your broker. Like that's, you know, we can always help you work through things. Erica's really smart too.
Sometimes. Right. So what are some best practices for dealing with an uncooperative broker? And I know we touched on this with them being unresponsive, but in this case, they may be more uncooperative.
Yeah, we've had some really, you guys are all really highly professional, and I appreciate that about you. And it's really hard when you go up against someone who's not at that same level and they're not cooperative, and sometimes they say really terrible things to you, and then we want to pull back and say, well, I don't want to do business with them, or I don't want to do this or that. There's some options. I just would prefer you guys to take the high road, right? It's just like going to that broker and saying, hey, Erica, you know, hasn't returned my call. Is she okay? Do you know of anything, right? It might be escalating in a very caring way, or a very, professional, right? Just a very professional way. It's taking a step back and not knowing where that person's coming from if they just screamed at you on the phone because you were 10 minutes late for your showing, or that they sent you an offer at 10:58 last night and it's 8:12 this morning and you haven't presented that offer yet. Like, I know that sounds really specific, like it had to have happened, and it did on Friday night and Saturday morning. So like, it's really interesting. I always think, like, put yourself in their shoes for a second and say, okay, well, you know, maybe they've written multiple offers with multiple people over the past, you know, months, and they haven't got the house, and maybe that's why they're behaving this way. Maybe, you know, someone kicked their dog. I don't really know. But you guys you can always control yourself. First and second reaction, I like that. Erica wrote me a little note here. My advice to the person that I got to speak to over the weekend was, it is never the person who throws the first punch, right? It's always the person, it's how you react to that punch. So my son played football. So football analogy, never once does the person get fouled or get a penalty. Well, not never once. Rarely do they get a penalty for the first person who takes a swing or a shoulder or whatever. It's the person that reacts to that. They're the ones that get the penalty called. So just be careful in your responses. Don't curse, right? Use professionalism. If they're uncooperative, we can escalate to their broker. If they're on a team, we can escalate to their rainmaker. You guys can escalate, you know, to us, your leadership team, and we'll help you through it. We're not going to do it for you.
Yeah, James says seek first to understand, which
Yeah.
are our core beliefs.
Yeah, come from curiosity, seek first to understand. Create a win-win opportunity. I could go down the list. Like, literally, that's how the answer should have been here. Erase everything I just said. See the Y4C2Ts and proceed with caution. That's how I would say it now. It's a great reminder.
Okay, when is it appropriate to discuss commissions charged outside of our brokerage?
Well, the answer is never. The answer is just, it's very simple, never. And since we're all part of the same brokerage, we're going to have this conversation, right? I think, what do they call that? They call it antitrust, right? Does anybody remember that from real estate school? Sherman Antitrust Act, right? So it's called price fixing. So we cannot, in any circumstance, be a party to a conversation, even if we're sitting at a table while other people are having this conversation. You are just as guilty for hearing it as you would be to be participating in it. So this is like a really hot button. I'm glad this question's on here. We cannot discuss what we charge for commission with other agents in other brokerages. Everybody, with the shake of heads, is everybody understand that part of it? What's interesting is it goes a little bit further. We can't discuss with other brokers who we will or will not work with. I did a little research on this today. Meaning, I don't like XYZ title. I think they're terrible. So I get together with a group of friends, my little broker gang, you know, from all these different brokerages, and we're having drinks, and I'm like, oh my goodness, did you hear about XYZ title? I'm never using them, and you shouldn't either. Well, then I just am in violation of an antitrust. I just made an antitrust violation. So we can't do that. We can't also blackball agents, right? So we can't get together as a group and say, okay, we're not going to work with ABC Realty, because we don't like them. They only charge, you know, 0.5% commission, or they only pay 0.5% commission. So we're just gonna blacklist them. This whole brokerage is not gonna work with them. And you shouldn't either. We can't do that. We can't do it, because that's not representing our clients in the best form either. If you choose to do this, a couple things are gonna happen. Number one, you can't be with our brokerage anymore. Number two, you could be liable for the fines, right? Any plaintiff's costs attorney costs or anything else. You could be relieved of your real estate license for 10 years or more. And there could be criminal penalties, including jail time. So we like to work with you, so don't do that. What do you think? Is that a good answer?
I'd say.
I got to be clear on just a few things, right? And antitrust is huge, right? We definitely do not want to have that. Now, if I'm ever teaching a class and I know that it's a mixed room, right? There's other brokers in there, which we often do. We can give an example of apples and oranges, yet I don't want you to do that unless you're really conscious about what you're doing. And so if anybody brings that up to you, just say, you know, we can't have this conversation. Or if you're in a class and they're talking about, I'm going to charge this many apples and this many oranges. Well, for whatever reason, they say that's okay. We just can't talk about dollars. So.
All right. So the last question that we have, and I know we've got a couple questions in the chat box, so feel free if you haven't already to stick your questions in the chat box and we'll get to them after this. What is the reason that my immediate family members or my LLC cannot purchase a HUD home?
Yeah, that's interesting too. Gosh, these are really great questions. Who thought of these, Erica? It was you. She's really smart. I told you guys. So we are a HUD listing broker, okay? Not every brokerage is a HUD approved listing broker. We have a master listing agreement with HUD. We have an agent in our brokerage who takes HUD listings, and that's Mandria Butici, Aceto. Sorry about that. Had to think of her name. Anyways, so she has the master listing agreement with us with HUD. So she takes on the HUD listings that come in. If you have a HUD master listing agreement, within it, it says that no agents in your brokerage or their family members, immediate, can purchase a HUD home. If we did not have that master listing agreement, you would be able to purchase a HUD home under pretty strict guidelines. You have to disclose that you're a real estate agent. You kind of, I was in REO for a really long time, and they weight the offers, like, because HUD is housing and urban development, so they want that to go to consumers, not necessarily people in the industry. So they just want to create housing for residents versus investors and stuff. So, you know, a resident, an owner occupant is going to have the highest priority, and then an investor, and then a realtor. So the reason you can't is simply because we are in a master listing agreement and we're not allowed.
And what is the reasoning behind that? Because that's a newer rule, right? Like within the past 12, 13 years.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say it was in the last, it probably was in that 2016. So we've had this master listing agreement with HUD since 2016. And I think that's when it changed, Erica, to be honest with you. So I think that, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the exact answer. And yet what I think might be the answer, right, is, you know, back in 2008, all the way to like 2014, real estate agents saw the benefit of buying properties really cheap. And back in 2008, there were some real estate agents that had really poor behavior and unprofessionalism. They would take a listing, they would lower the price on it and give a really low price, and then they'd buy it themselves, and then they'd flip it at a huge increase in value. So I think that's why I saw that HUD was doing it, was just to simply protect the consumer, protect their property and their investment from being taken advantage of. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on that? Like, I mean, I might have missed something there. That's what I think.
That's my best educated guess as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is, it's again, it's just like if you're, what was the question in the beginning? If you have to disclose if you're an owner or spouse or anything, that's if you have even 1% ownership of it. You have to, you can't do it. So.
There you go. All right. So we'll jump into the chat box here. Question from Renee Natoli. When a pre-listing appraisal has been done, is it strictly the property of the seller?
Sure.
I added in that other portion on the bottom. It kind of skipped down to the end.
Oh, I see, sorry.
That it's possible that when the actual approval, when the actual appraisal is done, it could come in possibly higher. So they don't, is that something that had to be, I didn't know if it had to be disclosed, or if it's strictly their property, so they don't have to, because, yeah, trying to, when we put it up and have an amount that we put it up for, and if the appraisal comes in the second time and appraises it for a different value, that's kind of what I was thinking. But then someone else said, no, you should be able to have that on files because someone could ask for it. And I thought, well, isn't that the property of the seller?
Yeah, it is the property of the seller for sure. I mean, they're the ones paying for it. And yes, so yes and yes are the answers to the two questions. Yes, it's the seller's property, and yes, it could come in at a higher amount, and it could come in at a lower amount.
Right.
And if it comes in at a lower amount or a higher amount, that seller's appraisal has, I don't think, any weight in what the new appraisal is going to be, because the bank wants a disinterested appraisal, right? So the buyer nor the seller own that appraisal. I think I'm
So
saying.
that's strictly just for guidance on if you have a house that's unique. So
Yeah.
it's a good way to figure out, but otherwise it doesn't have to be disclosed anywhere. I guess that was my main thing, is wondering if it needed to be disclosed anywhere else, or.
I'm going to give you a firm I don't think so.
Okay, good.
I can't think of a reason. And if you get to a point where we need to know that for sure, just let me know and I'll call down and I'll ask,
No, I'm happy with that answer. I wanted to make sure that it didn't have to be disclosed anywhere.
I don't know why it would. That's like if you get two real estate agents. I mean, I think an appraisal is just an opinion also, right? It's a price opinion based on data. We have the same data. So let's say Janet and I go out on a listing and we give two different prices. I think that's the seller's information.
Okay.
That's how I think of it. And again, if you get in a sticky situation, just call. We'll handle it for you.
Thanks. Yeah, because I was wondering with appraisals too, usually I thought appraisals, a lot of times when you're looking at comps, a lot of times you want to go within 6 months back. But so when appraisals are coming in and saying the house is so unique, we haven't found one except for like a year and a half, 2 years ago, to me, it seemed like such a far distance of comparisons in the market. But then he did back it up, showing that the market fluctuations from a year and a half ago. But it just seems so odd that, really going back a year and a half to even find a house that was close to it seemed really skinny. But with inventory so tight, I could understand.
Well, its inventory is so tight, and if it is a unique property, they have different rules, right? So if you're in a city, they give you so many, what is it, like a quarter mile or something that they really like those houses to be within. You get out into the country and it's, it could be a 3 or 5 mile radius. It could be different school districts and like that. So the rules get different the more unique and obscure the property is. So
he did say it was one of the out of 16 years, it was one of the most unique ones on the top 10 of the unique list. So, and just like having to check into other cities and stuff. So it was trying to get a good price point for comps was what part of the reason why we did that.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
help.
And again, it's going to give you a, some sort of a bullet to, a target to shoot for, and yet you can't guarantee that that's going to be the price.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
Wade asked, can you talk a little bit about earnest money deposits and mutual release, and when one side refuses to sign a mutual release? The process side and the compliance side of things.
Swade, you're only allowed one question and there's like 10 in there. I know you're laughing at that. Okay, so earnest money and mutual release when one side refuses to sign. Yeah, we're getting a lot of that, like sellers refusing to sign the mutual release, even when the terms are clear, like the home inspection, right? we have the opportunity to get out of that if we're representing the buyer per our contract. If the buyer has, if there's, you know, fundamental things with the house that come up, they have the right to get out. And yet we're still seeing sellers like dig in their heels, and there's nothing we can do about it. So best practice is when you're having a buyer consultation and you're letting them know how the process goes, right? We're educating our buyers. Give them that as an option. Like, if this is your only $1,000 and you can't buy another house if they don't give it to you, then maybe we should only put 500 down, right? Maybe we should think about different things. The flip side to that is we've only had one. I've been here 8 years. We've only had one that eventually did not get signed, and we actually got the money back 2 years later from the title company. So I think those are pretty good odds. Sellers typically will sign, they get bent, they don't want to sign right away. It's rarer that the buyer won't sign it. So sometimes, let's take it, excuse me. Usually it's during, we get the biggest hang up at it's not with loans and things like that. It's literally with the home inspection. That's when we see the biggest hang up with buyers and sellers getting out of the contract. A buyer can ask for the tiniest little morsel to be done. And that, like, if, let's say a $12 GFCI installed, and the seller then has the right to say, no, I'm not going to install that, and here's a mutual release. And the buyer has no right to do anything other than sign that release, right? Because the buyer opened up that agreement. Let's say the buyer said, well, it's only a $12 item, I still want the house. Well, okay, so they won't sign the mutual release. Well, that money sits there. The seller still can sell that house. They can remarket it and they can sell it. The buyer's options, sorry, I feel like I'm doing all the talking. The buyer's options are, they can take them to small claims court. That's a really simple one, because they will win if it's a loan or if it's something that's in the contract and covered. Seller won't sign, buyer can take them to small claims court. Court will mandate that the money's released. Title has to release the money, and then the seller is going to have to pay for those court costs. That's what we see happen a lot. Sometimes it's as simple as just writing a demand letter, and then even more times it's just as simple as saying, hey, give them the weekend to think about it. They'll get another offer, cooler heads will prevail, and they'll move forward. Did I miss anything? Swade, is there any addition to that question?
I'd have to talk to you personally. It's too much to go into in the group, but I may have our second, so yay me.
I'm here.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right. Renee asked, when you schedule a showing and you arrive to the house and the agent is still showing, still blocking the drive, still engaging their client, how do you politely ask them to leave?
Politely ask them to leave.
Yeah.
Socially distance, walk up and just say, hey, Renee, I get that you guys are still here, and, you know, I've got the house now. I'd like, you know, can we just make this transition?
Yeah, one time I had one that I thought, oh yeah, okay, no problem. I'm just gonna finish here. And I thought,
During COVID, or, I mean, since March, or no?
no, it was right before that.
Oh, yeah.
I thought, wow, that person was just being kind of rude. Like, he saw us and he was already 15 minutes. He was still, oh, no, I'm just going to finish showing. And I thought, wow, is this a norm? I'm just trying to find out what norms are.
Well, there's new norms, right? That we're not going back to our old norms. There's new norms.
Right.
Back in the day, you could have 3 people in the house. Like, I've done that, right?
Okay.
I've been there because showings could overlap. Right?
Okay. I didn't know if that was a norm or not.
Right. Marcia could be showing from 2 to 3, and I could have it scheduled from 2:30 to 3:30. Well, we both arrive in the second half. Typically, Marcia would finish on the inside and I would go around the outside, or vice versa. And yet if it's pouring the rain, I may walk in and be like, hey, you guys upstairs or downstairs? We'll go the opposite. Like,
Oh,
it
okay.
was just things like that. Today, that doesn't happen. We can't do that, right? We have to look at the showing instructions. We have to be really mindful. I don't even think that, what is it, showing time will allow overlapping showings. Am I right on that? Anybody? I think that's right.
Yeah.
So it
I
should
guess it
be-
was more towards from the beginning before COVID. I guess I'm extra positive about COVID heading out sometime, but I didn't realize that that happened in the past. I thought it was like very official. So now that I know that it's kind of a norm that in the past norm, that it was okay to do that, because I thought it was really taboo that people aren't supposed to overlap things. Okay. I didn't want to, chase the guy out if it was okay.
I've been a party to ill behavior too. Like, I got my people, I got to get them in. I'm on a timeline. I've got 20 houses I'm showing.
So,
And, we just have to, again, we have to be, my wish for all of us is that we act at a higher professional level, whatever that looks like. So, however, if you put yourself in that house, how would you like them to come and ask you to get done?
right.
Right? Then do the same.
Notice that a lot of people don't act the way that I do though sometimes. So that's why I just didn't know what the norms were. So
You are right. Not everybody acts the way you do, or like I do, or like, all of it.
right.
Is there another question? What is that?
One more. I did put one more on the tail end of that one.
Yeah, we had a lot of water questions. It was when a buyer closes and there's water in the basement the next week after closing. Well, then that gets tricky, and you call your broker.
Okay. Might have to call you.
I feel like I'm going to be busy after I get off this.
No, but is it true though? Like when there's heavy flooded waters, it's true. I've seen it before. So many houses that didn't have flooding in 20 years, all of a sudden they have water in their basement.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if there's any other procedures I need to go about.
Well, the interesting thing is, right, we are licensed to sell real estate. So we get to negotiate and we get to sell real property. We are not licensed to negotiate repairs post-close.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yet, we want to be really helpful to our clients and be that resource. So it's kind of a fine line. So when I've talked to Peg down at OAR, she said, really best practice would be, let's say, Renee, you and I are in a deal. You have the buyer, I have the seller, okay? Your buyer moves in a week later, right? The next week, we get this huge flooding. Then the buyer comes to you and says, they didn't disclose this, the basement's leaking, it's da-da-da-da-da, right? Ideally, honestly, if we never had water in the basement prior to, it really isn't my problem. That's the reality, and yet your buyer's gonna want some sort of resolution.
Is it okay to ask, like, especially if there was a inspection done and the inspector didn't find any signs of water, damage in the past? And so that's kind of how I handled it. Like, well, we had the inspection, there was nothing in the disclosure. Disclosure was even a real estate agent, so they would be themselves if they didn't disclose. So I said, well, maybe it might even be helpful. The inspector can even give you, because he already had that report done, you could ask the professional also, when things like that have happened, how is it, that it's possible that water could come in from an intrusive place 20 years later. So maybe I just thought it would be even more insight as to how that could happen, and that it wasn't something that was set up to hurt him from the beginning, that it could have happened just like it happened.
Yeah, I think a lot of things just happen. Like that rain the other day, like a couple weeks ago.
Crazy.
It was crazy. It's not normal, right?
Right.
And yet, well, I'm not going to get into that. Yes, it's not normal. So what we can do is we can take an email from that buyer and send it over to the seller's agent and say the buyer would like to know whatever this.
Mhm.
The seller's agent returns the email to us and says the seller says they've never had water in that basement.
Mhm.
We give that information to the buyer, and then we are out of it. At
Okay,
that
good.
point, if we go further then we're violating license law because we are not licensed to negotiate like that. Okay.
Okay.
So we can do one quick email, and then we're out. And we
Yeah.
never write contracts. We never do, we never write addendums. We never transfer money. That is always between the buyer and the seller post-close. Okay. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yeah, I guess it just becomes delicate when it's your own brother, so you got to face him. So I think it all went well. I mean, I said exactly what you said. And I mean, so far, everything seems to be good. I just didn't know if there was anything else that I needed to do or say.
Here's the next line that you say. If it's not coming to a resolution, you say, hey, I can recommend a couple of real estate attorneys. Would you like their names?
Yeah.
That's it. And give 3 or 4 names.
Good. I think we got like, extra caulking around this or checking the gutters. It's good. I think it's going to be good just for future reference in case I missed a beat, but I think I've got everything that you said. I did exactly what you said, went to the other agent. It gave him the exact information and seems to be okay. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Nope. When in doubt, like if you forget this conversation, when in doubt, just reach out to your leadership.
That's what I'm doing. That's why I'm on this call.
I know. We're here for you. That's why.
Right. That's why I like popping in on these sessions, because then I like, instead of coming with all kinds of questions every other day, I just pile them up in one session.
I love it. Send them to Erica. She can answer quite a lot. So she doesn't even. Yeah.
And we wouldn't need you on this call.
I know, but I can sit with you on this call. It'd be fun. Go ahead, Erica.
Anyone have anything else? No, we're a little early to end.
Hands are empty.
Yeah, that's okay.
So I'm going to talk to Swade later. Anybody else going to need a call from me later? Janet, May, Marcia, who else? Who need? Get you on the list. No, you guys need me. I'm here. Just give me a call. Give me a text. And we'll get something together and help you out through with everything. It's a unique time.
We appreciate your time. Thank you.
I appreciate you guys. See ya.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.